Good morning.
Good morning.
It's great to see so many people here today. I have a confession to make. I got up this morning and I was a ball of nerves about presenting today, and largely because I've always been told that my voice is very country. And my husband and I, we go several places, travel to different states, and the first thing someone says to me always is, "You're not from around here, are you?" So I walked in this morning and I heard banjo music and I knew I was in the right place. So my name is Stephanie Tweed, as Daniel said before, and I'm going to help identify some forward-thinking leaders for you and hopefully help you to start identifying them in your organization. Scott started out the morning telling you that, as a general definition, forward thinking was using past events and current knowledge to anticipate what is coming next. And this is usually done through a combination of intuition and possibility thinking. He told you that it was far different from futuristic thinking, partly because futuristic thinking is more looking at your organization in the next 10, 20, 30 years, whereas forward thinking is more about 1 to 5 years down the road, something that you can predict what's going to happen by looking at trends and patterns. So we're not asking you to predict the future, we're simply asking you to prepare for it. So who are forward thinkers? What do these people look like? What characteristics do they have? And are you one of them? Well, I'll tell you, first of all, you are one. Everybody is. But some people are just better at tapping into that intuition. Forward thinkers are those who take possibility thinking and they turn it into an innovative idea for the future. You can be a forward thinker without implementing the idea, or you can have someone else implement it for you. For example, Professor Bloomfield, and we talked about Australian sports, he was the one who came up with the innovative idea. He was not the one who implemented the idea. In fact, it took 8 years to get it implemented. But even if he never shared the idea, he's still a forward thinker. He just doesn't have to necessarily share it. Forward thinkers see the big picture and they're able to identify trends and patterns of today. They look at where their organization was 5 years ago, they see how it progresses to today, and then they see where they want it to be in another 3 or 4 years. They feel strongly about something and they explore that intuition to the fullest. One of the forward thinkers I highlighted for you today, he talks about intuition, how he had that gut feeling and he just knew that there was something to it. The problem was, how was he going to share that and how would he get everybody else on board? Forward thinkers have a drive or a motivation to learn, to create, and better the world. Last year's symposium focused on motivation, autonomy in the workplace. If you want people to be successful, you have to give them autonomy. You have to give them a task, then you have to trust them to actually complete it. Forward thinkers are allowed to be somewhat autonomous in their work to enhance their creative capabilities. Now, some organizations have already caught on to this. FedEx and Google would be two of them. Both FedEx and Google offer days where the organization workers can do nothing but think of new ways to improve their organization. And this is a pretty cool thing because although they don't call them forward-thinking days, they are indeed forward-thinking days. That's what they want their people to do. They want to tap into these people who work in the organization, who are forward thinkers, and they want to use those capabilities. And last, forward thinkers encourage change and a disruption of the norm. Research shows that normally, anytime you implement a change, you're going to see an implementation dip. People don't like change, they're reluctant to it. So at first they lose confidence. Then eventually they build that confidence back up and it becomes part of the norm. They get used to it. So forward thinkers are the ones who, just when people become comfortable and become complacent, they become uneasy because they automatically see that a change is needed and they need to shift things around. So where do I find forward thinkers in my organization? That's a good question. Number one, we know everybody's a forward thinker. And Erica's going to talk to you about that today. She's going to help you realize that everyone is a forward thinker. Forward thinkers can be found anywhere in your organization and in any one. You're not required to have a CEO status or be in an executive position to be a forward thinker. In fact, a lot of forward thinkers aren't in those positions and they're not comfortable being there sometimes. Forward thinkers are leaders, but leaders are not always the people in the organization who hold power. Just because you're at the top of an organization, you're at the head of the totem pole, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a leader. It could mean that you have the power of position. Some of the most powerful people in your organization, the people with the greatest ideas, sometimes don't sit in an executive chair. For example, if you want to know what's really going on in your organization, ask the secretary. She knows everything. about everybody, guaranteed. And she has better ideas as to how to innovate new things than almost anyone. Margaret Thatcher perhaps said it best when she said, being powerful is like being a lady. If you have to tell people you are, you aren't. If you leave with my presentation with nothing else, I want you to remember that no one is a forward thinker all the time. Imagine the amount of energy it would take to constantly be worrying about what's coming next. It's not possible. We know that senior managers most of the time only spend 3% of their time on forward thinking. So what happens to the other 97% of the time? They spend it working on current things. What's coming next? What's tomorrow? What's the next day? What's my plan for 2 weeks down the road? So how do I make up for this? I have all kinds of people working for me in my organization. And those people can be forward thinkers also. So you don't have to be a forward thinker all the time. It's not required. In fact, some of the most successful people in the world have moments where they're forward thinking, and then they have moments where they're not. Sometimes our failures are the one thing that makes us stronger. We learn from our mistakes, we become a better leader. So remember, everyone's a forward thinker, but it's not possible to be a forward thinker all the time. So let's take a look at some forward thinkers. Exhibit A, Henry Ford. Without a doubt, Henry Ford was a forward thinker. However, he had moments in life where he wasn't forward thinking. In response to leadership, Henry Ford said, the question, who ought to be the boss, is like asking who ought to be the tenor in the quartet. Obviously, it's the man who can sing tenor. Now, it doesn't always work that way, but that's the intention behind it. Henry Ford had the idea for a Model T before it was ever implemented, long before. In fact, he had 2 unsuccessful companies before he ever could get people to believe in his Model T idea. A lot of people don't know that. They think he was successful all the way through life. That's not true. He had moments where he was forward thinking, but he had other moments where he lacked in that area. He no doubt was forward thinking in his ideas. However, his management and business skills were not so forward thinking. Exhibit B, Mark Cuban. You might recognize Mark Cuban as the owner of the NBA basketball team, the Dallas Mavericks, for all you sports fans. He also plays on the Shark Tank, where he's an investor in some businesses. My husband and I watch that every Friday night, hoping for an innovative idea. He owns Access, or he's the chairman of Access Television. He owns Magnolia Pictures and Landmark Theaters, and he's a billionaire. But he started out as just a normal guy. If you ever see an interview with Mark Cuban, and I'll show you one here in a minute, you'll notice that the business attire he's wearing right there, he's very uncomfortable in. He would much rather be in jeans and a t-shirt. But he's a forward thinker from way back. At the age of 12, Mark Cuban was selling trash bags around the neighborhood because anybody will buy something from a boy or children around, anything. And then he convinced all his friends to sell them, and then they were to give him the money because he needed a new pair of basketball shoes. And he was such a good salesman at 12 years old that he got all the money and he got the basketball shoes. Then he went to college. He was looking for something a little bit creative to make money, so he decided he'd sell and trade stamps. Now you have to think, Mark Cuban's not that old. So even in his time, selling and trading stamps is kind of a novel concept. He actually graduated from college with some of the money he made from that, and they offered him a job right out of college from a software company. But he actually turned down that job. He started his own consulting company. He had big ambitions. He had this idea for micro solutions. He sold that company for $6 million to a subsidiary of H&R Block, but he wasn't finished because he had an intuition. And that intuition was that the real money was going to be in the internet, that technology was transforming so much that that's where things were going. And he had a love for basketball. So how could he put the two things together? So he came up with this idea, what if we could put audio over the internet? What if I could listen to my basketball games over the internet? Wouldn't that be a neat idea while I'm at work to be able to hear the basketball game and I'm not missing out on anything? But nobody's going to believe me and nobody's going to buy into this. So he had about 10 of his closest buddies and he said, hey, I've got this idea. And I think it's a great idea. I'd like to start a company called AudioNet. And he said, you know, at the end of 5 years, we're either going to be millionaires or we're going to be broke. So he was so passionate about it, and other people believed in him so much that he actually got those 6 people on board. They started the company, and they sold it for $6 billion and they transformed it to broadcast.com. Now, it's a novel concept, but one thing people don't really realize about Mark Cuban is, though he seems to be a down-to-earth guy, he's a very normal person. He has no extraordinary abilities. He's just somebody sitting at a conference just like you are who just came up with a good idea out of his gut. Okay, one unique thing about Mark Cuban is Henry Ford transformed the way that our transportation system worked with the idea for the automobile. Mark Cuban transformed the way we communicate with people over the internet. Imagine a day where you can't listen to Pandora. I almost can't remember a day where I couldn't listen to Pandora, or I didn't have audio over the internet. In fact, it's hard for me to remember a day where I didn't have access to a computer. So this, for me, is huge. It was almost like imagining a business conference where you have Skype capabilities. Maybe you have audio, but what if you didn't have, or maybe you have video, but what if you didn't have audio? That's a key part. It's like taking something from the telegram to the telephone. This was taking something that you could only text and type in through email and make it an audio capability. Exhibit C is Marissa Mayer. Some of you may recognize her as the new CEO of Yahoo. But she didn't start out at Yahoo. In fact, she started out at Google, and she was an engineer. She was one of the very first engineers hired. Among the first 10, she was the only woman. She has made quite the name for herself. She's credited largely with her ability to be a user guru. And in that, she would take things that users would suggest for the company, and she would constantly change it. So when she came in, Yahoo was at the top for search engines. When she left, Google was at the top. And they credit her for a lot of this. When you type in google.com, you'll see a blank search page. It's white. In fact, when they were testing it, a lot of people thought the page didn't correctly download because there weren't any of those distracting ads all over the place. So they thought something must be wrong. That's what we're used to. But in fact, it was a genius idea. It would take people who were a little bit hesitant to use computers and the internet, and it gave them a sense of efficacy about it. So all of a sudden they become more comfortable using the internet because they don't have distractors. Simply type in what you're searching and there it goes. She's also credited with the Google logo that changes daily. People sometimes log on just to see what it is. That's her idea too. So she prides herself in the fact that she constantly wants to change the business. And because Yahoo's had so much faith in her, they're hoping she can do the same thing for them. Because she talks about taking an innovative idea, implementing it, and then constantly changing it to improve it. And to do that by asking consumers what they like. Sounds like a novel idea, right? So she's taken a company all the way to the top, doing just that. So now Yahoo's hired her, and they have so much confidence in her that the day that they decided she would be CEO and president of Yahoo, her duties were to start the very next day. There was no transition process. She became it. So now she is one of the most powerful women in the world, as listed by Forbes magazine. She also is pregnant, and she's trying to handle a brand new company. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. I have a video clip from Marissa where they interviewed her when she was still with Google, and she talks about getting those ideas, taking them to the implementation phase, and changing. Alright, so to combine all of these things, in order to be a forward thinker and to implement some idea that you have, there has to exist a positive perfect storm. Even when an individual has a moment of forward thinking, they can't always capitalize on it. For example, Professor Bloomfield, 8 years later, for his idea. Henry Ford, 2 failed businesses before his idea took off. A positive perfect storm must exist where the individual is able to convince others that the idea is one that's worth pursuing. Mark Cuban and audio.net. It all goes back to sharing an innovative idea and having that passion to pursue it as an organization. You have to believe in it so much that you're able to convince other people to believe in it. And this idea comes from anywhere, anytime, and in anyone within your organization. So you started out the morning with Scott, who talked about the concept of forward thinking and what it was. And he talked about how forward thinking is being applied to different areas, architecture, the forward thinking house. Then he brought in cars. Philip brought in sports. And I introduced you to some innovators, to some of those forward thinkers that we might be familiar with. The rest of your afternoon is going to be dedicated to helping you realize you're a forward thinker and helping you transform your organization into a forward-thinking one. They're going to talk to you about ways to tap into your intuition, to become better and practiced at it. And then finally, when you leave, hopefully you'll have something to take back to your organization and start thinking. and have everyone around you start thinking. So hopefully your business will be more successful when you have forward thinking in mind. Thank you.